Hello, it is my honor to welcome you to our forum for candidates for Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney. I'm Jen Winkler, President of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. This forum is presented by our league in partnership with the Snohomish County Forum Coalition. We thank these coalition members for their continuing support. C3 Coalition, AAUW, Edmonds College, the Daily Herald, KSER, KXIR, NAACP, Sultan School District, and Snohomish Libraries. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920, the same year the women got the right to vote. For 100 years, we have been a nonpartisan, activist, grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. In 1976, the League sponsored the first televised presidential debates, winning an Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Broadcast Journalism. We have been upholding that tradition right here in Snohomish County by sponsoring forums for local, state, and federal offices. Since our organization neither supports nor opposes candidates or political parties, we feel we provide a thoughtful environment that allows voters to make their own informed choices. Tonight's forum will be co-moderated by League member Karen Madsen and NAACP member Paul Benz. It's my pleasure to turn it over to you, Mr. Benz.
Thank you, Jen. The Snohomish County chapter of the NAACP is honored and privileged to be a part of this forum tonight. So we're glad to be here. Before we begin, we want to give a special shout out to our live stream sponsor, the Sultan School District, with technical help from Dave Moon and a terrific team of students at turkpride.tv. Let's give them a moment to say hello. And to those in the virtual space, thank you for joining us as well. This forum will run about an hour. Today's questions were prepared with input from community members and are quite comprehensive. We will not be taking additional questions from our live audience for this event. The recording of the forum will be available on this same YouTube channel for later viewing. And now let me turn to my co-moderator, League member Karen Madsen.
Thanks, Paul. Let me provide some background on the position featured in this forum. The Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney is elected to a 4-year term and is in charge of prosecuting adult and juvenile felony cases in Snohomish County. The Civil Division of the office also serves as the legal advisor to all county departments and agencies and defends or prosecutes criminal cases on behalf of county government. The Family Support Division litigates issues regarding child support in cases referred by the State Department of Social and Health Services, the Division of Child Support. And the office maintains a victim witness unit, which provides advocacy services for crime victims and facilitates the testimony of crime victims. Candidates for Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney this year are Jason Cummings and Brett Rogers. Thank you, Mr. Cummings and Mr. Rogers. We thank you for your participation in this forum and your willingness to serve if elected. Ground rules for forum participation were sent ahead of time to the participants, and they've agreed to engage in respectful communication throughout the event.
Let me explain briefly the question and answer period rules, and then we can begin. Questions have not been shared ahead of time with the candidates. Karen and I will pose the questions as the moderators. Each candidate will have either 60 or 90 seconds to respond. We will state these changes clearly, and we are using a countdown timer visible to all candidates, and time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. We will also allow each candidate at the end of our question section to ask one question of their opponent, based on the information and answers given during this forum. Each will have up to 30 seconds to pose that question. Their opponent will have 60 seconds to respond to that question. We will change the starting order for each question, alternating between the two candidates to ensure a fair sequence. The order for the first question will be Brett Rogers and then Jason Cummings. Let's begin. Candidates, you have 60 seconds to respond to this first question. What qualifications, in addition to the minimum required by law, make you a strong candidate to be the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney? Mr. Rogers.
Well, thank you. In addition to the requirements by law, I have over 20 years of law enforcement experience. And as part of that, I was firmly in middle management with the City of Seattle Police Department. I've led teams of up to 120 law enforcement professionals. I've experience with case management. I was a detective sergeant in the domestic violence unit. So I've experienced triaging cases, assigning work, making sure that they meet the work investigations meet prosecutorial standards. I have experience leading people, ensuring that they know what policies are, they know what the mission is, they've got the proper tools and training to effectively accomplish the mission. And then I also have accountability experience. I served as an internal investigator for 4 years. So I believe that accountability is for everyone. And it is that management experience that I will bring to the office and serve the people of Snohomish County.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Jason Cummings. I've been a 24-year veteran of the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. In fact, my entire career as a lawyer has been spent as a deputy prosecuting attorney. I started in the King County Prosecutor's Office right out of law school, where I was in the district court unit prosecuting misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. After the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, I went to the Kitsap County Prosecutor's Office for a couple years, where I first began my foyer in the civil division, as they say. All this time I was living in Snohomish County, and when my dream job opened up, it was here at the Snohomish County Prosecutor's Office. For the last 24 years, I've been serving this community. The last 15 now I've spent as the Chief Civil Deputy. In addition to running the civil division, which is a group of 26 lawyers and 9 support staff, I've also been managing the office's overall budget of $30+ million. Experience matters, and I'm excited to bring that experience to the elected helm.
Thank you very much. The next question is a very simple one. What is your general justice system philosophy or approach? And we'll start with Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. The criminal justice system, one, requires balance. We've had lots of conversations within county government about the three-legged stool, the balance between the prosecutor's office, the balance with the public defenders, and also with the courts. And it's critical that we work on that balance. But I also think within the working on the balance of the system, you know, my personal philosophy is one that we have to have both accountability, but also compassion. Some of the biggest issues we're facing and our communities are seeing every day are the substance use disorder, mental health disorders on our streets. We on the local government side are going to have to step up because the funding from the state level has not been there. So we need to look at alternatives and ways that we can address these issues right here on our streets and in our yards. In the conversations that I've had with the mayors and the police throughout our community, I think we're very excited about the opportunity for partnerships. As the lead or point person when it comes to our lawsuits against Big Pharma, we're sitting down and having these conversations now as the proceeds of those lawsuits are coming back to the local jurisdictions, of saying, how can we partner, coordinate, and work together to pool our resources? So rather than having 15 siloed programs, we can work on a coordinated effort. But again, at the end of the day, the prosecutor's office will always prioritize the most serious crimes, homicides, violent crimes, sex crimes, crimes against children, domestic violence, and DUI. And we will use our resources to prosecute those cases.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So yeah, I agree with a lot of what Jason said. The justice system, there are interrelated parts: the courts, the public defenders, private defense counsel, and law enforcement. Even though we have we work together, we each have our distinct roles. And my take on this, on the position, is that people aren't electing a social worker. We're not electing a head of the Public Defenders Association. We're electing a prosecutor, and that person's job is to vigorously prosecute crimes in order to keep our communities safe. Now, that's not to say we can't do that without compassion. I honor and respect our Constitution. I will ensure that everyone's constitutional rights are respected. The accused will be treated fairly. They'll get their day in court. But at the end of the day, it is the role of this office to prosecute crime. Again, we can work with partners, but that is what this position's job is. I agree. My general approach would be to prioritize the most violent and most prolific offenders. We've let far too many people slide. We've excused criminal behavior in the name of compassion, where I think it's more compassionate to hold people accountable, give them a chance to learn from their mistakes. They need to face a sanction in order for them to have a learning opportunity. So I believe it's more compassionate to hold people accountable. Thank you.
The next question is, and we'll begin with Mr. Rogers, that the question is, what are your priorities for the work of criminal, civil, and family support divisions?
Well, I touched on that just a moment ago. My priority for the criminal division is prioritizing the most violent and most prolific offenders. We need to pick up the cadence, pick up the pace a little bit. There's a massive backlog of felony cases right now. So some tough decisions are going to be made, and we need to pick up the pace, as I said. For the civil division, obviously, we want to provide sound legal advice to the various boards and commissions and departments of the county, and defend the county in lawsuits, and also represent the county if we're ever a plaintiff. Family support division, that is an important role also, to make sure that those that should be receiving support are receiving that. So we'll vigorously make sure that people live up to their obligations. But going back to, I think of those three divisions, the criminal, obviously, I think day to day has the most impact on voters, and that's where the main focus will be. As I said, there's a massive backlog of felony cases right now. Crime is out of control, if I do say so. There's just a press conference yesterday where the mayor of Everett noted that shootings in the city of Everett are up 132%. So we have our work cut out for us, and I look forward to taking on that work.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. Obviously, for the three different divisions, distinct divisions within the office, I have three different sets of priorities. Having been the chief of the civil division and the interim chief of the family support division over the last 15 years on at least 4 different occasions, I have a unique insight as to different needs and aspects of the work that is done there. But for the criminal division, first priority is standing up our homicide unit. Part of the budget request that we've made of the county council, in fact, I was in front of the council today, is to put together a unit that will focus exclusively on serious homicides within our community. This is backed up by the work that we've done joining the task force. So the prosecutor's office criminal division has representation on a task force with the sheriff's office, with the city of Everett, city of Marysville, to work on the violent crime task force that's out there. We need to make sure that we strengthen those bonds, improve that communication. But also we need to start working on the prolific offenders. We need to be focused on the idea that those small set of folks who are creating the most work is where we really need to focus our priorities. And so we have a budget ask that will go with that as well. In the civil division, we need to continue providing effective legal advice, effective defense of the county. We defend hundreds of millions of dollars in claims every year, and we've done so successfully. As for family support, it's to continue the relationship we have with the state of Washington to make sure that those who have family support obligations are held accountable and that we're collecting for those families in need.
Thank you. The next question, and Mr. Cummings, you'll start. Are all the divisions of the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office adequately funded and staffed, including the civil, criminal, and family support divisions? If not, what recommendations would you propose?
The short answer is no. The reality is the criminal division, we need greater resources. We are just advocating to add 4 more deputies of a senior nature to the criminal division to handle the homicides, to handle a training DPA position so that we can be working with both the law enforcement community as well as internally training our DPAs. And then finally, someone who can focus on those prolific offender cases and those unlawful possession of firearm cases. And that's just a start. It is the amount of violent crime that is increased in the community necessitates an appropriate response. We'll be working with our partners and our stakeholders. As for the civil division, the staffing levels are right now appropriate. My concern is with the absorption of the health district turning into a health department, that there'll be a body of work that may pressure the civil division in terms of having to provide effective services. I've been having conversations already with the health district staff on their legal services and the needs that they have. So we look forward to partnering and making sure that we have an appropriate relationship. One of the positions added in the next year's budget will be to focus on health district work. We're excited about that and excited to partner there. The one division of the office I think has the best staffing levels. In fact, we carry several vacant positions because of the state funding, is family support. We've been doing a great job with the resources we have. We currently have, I believe, about 6 or 7 vacancies, primarily because we're not going to fill positions unnecessarily. We'll be judicious with the resources that are provided to us.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I believe that the prosecuting attorney's office in general is underfunded and understaffed. That is something we need to work on, especially the criminal division. As I mentioned, there's a massive backlog of cases, criminal felony cases. I think one way to approach that is to be more transparent. Right now, the prosecuting attorney's office is it's pretty opaque. The public does not have a good understanding how much work is being done. There's no easy source of information to go to see how many cases they're handling, how the cases are being disposed of. So that's one of the things I really want to focus on is transparency, showing the public just how much work is incoming, just how much work the prosecuting attorneys are doing. And then we can get the public behind us with their support to approach county council for additional funds. It's a much easier ask if the public and the county council is armed with the knowledge of, just where we're at, just how much work is being done, and just how much work is falling to the wayside because we're not adequately staffed. Another thing I think we need to look at is starting pay. Right now, the starting pay for deputy prosecutors is quite low, considering they have to have an advanced degree. They have to have a JD to get through the door. And there's a lot other jobs out there that start off paying better that don't require that advanced degree.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, you'll take the lead on this next question about the activities within your office. As prosecuting attorney, how would you assure diversity, equity, and inclusion among the attorneys, staff, and other personnel in your office?
Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying that I personally, I find it a little bit troubling when we talk about certain populations being over or underrepresented, given the within the greater population. When things like that occur, it's often many factors, and there's many layers to that onion to peel back. And so unless you can really dig into it and find the underlying causes, I think that doesn't do us much good. So how I approach this is that I treat everyone, I recognize that each one of us are individual human beings. We all have different lived experiences. We all have different backgrounds. So my approach is to treat everybody as a fellow human being, regardless of what they look like, where they're from, what religion they practice. And so I would not only model that behavior, but let every member of the prosecuting attorney's office know that's what I expect of them, and that there will be zero tolerance for any sort of discrimination or harassment or bullying. And as I said, I've got a background in internal investigations. I've handled many discrimination and bullying complaints in the past, so I know what that looks like and I know how to prevent it.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, same question to you.
Thank you, Karen. I think first and foremost, actions speak louder than words. Already our office is very much involved in the county's Office of Social Justice with their diversity, equity, and inclusion monthly meetings. I sit and participate in those where we identify ways that we as county government as a whole, but in particular what we can do in our individual offices to improve the diversity and the inclusion that we are seeking. In addition, over this past year, the office has stood up its own DEI committee. And within that committee, we are working on bringing together programs, both trainings internally. One of the things that the Supreme Court required via the Bar Association is to have more than just regular CLEs that are on substantive law, but to also look at social equity and justice issues. And so we're bringing those trainings in-house. But really where we really have to go is to seek out a broader applicant pool. And one of the things that we've been very focused on in the last 6 to 12 months has been our recruiting apparatus. And that is, we've traditionally sought out the local graduates. So it's UW, it's Seattle U, it's Gonzaga. We're now reaching out across the country to put our job postings out at law schools across the United States. And in particular, we're trying to identify law schools that have greater levels of diversity to attract those candidates to come to Snohomish County so that we can get them into our job pool. In addition, we need to work on that across the board with all hirings, whether it's staff, whether it's victim advocates. But it's critical that we make that first step in that effort. I'm proud of the work that we've done.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, you'll take the lead on this next one about maintaining an impartial perspective. How would you ensure your office maintains an impartial perspective while making decisions about charging crimes in the criminal division and about advising county departments in the civil division?
Integrity is critical. The citizens of Snohomish County have an absolute right to expect that the work of the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office is not based on politics. Politics need to be left at the door. We need to make decisions based on the facts and the law, particularly when we're looking at charging decisions. We have to make sure that all decisions are made based on the facts that are presented in the investigating reports and based on the law and the standards that we have in front of us. When it comes to the provision of legal advice, in a way, for the last 15 years, one of the things in leading the civil division and talking with our attorneys is the importance of being Switzerland, for lack of a better term. We need to be the neutral body that provides unbiased legal advice so that regardless of what client entity comes to us, the advice is the same. We don't fashion advice to say, well, the council can get this advice and the executive will get some different set of advice. We need to be consistent in making sure that our advice is appropriate and free of the politics. We're not elected to set the policy for the council, the executive, the sheriff, the clerk, the auditor, or any of the independent elected officials. So we need to make sure that we're there to help them achieve their policy goals through sound legal advice and through the provision of services, both on the criminal side and on the civil side, that is free of bias and directly without the politics.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers, same question for you.
I think the easiest way to maintain impartiality is to recognize that our Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law. So on the criminal side, everybody gets held to the same standard of conduct, regardless of what they look like, where they're from, any other personal characteristics. And the corollary to that is everyone should have the same access to justice, again, regardless of any personal traits or characteristics. I think far too often lately, victims have been forgotten about. Sometimes offenders get treated as the real victims, and victims don't get justice. We need to make sure that we change that. On the civil side, the prosecuting attorney is an independent elected official. So yes, we want to give good, solid, sound advice uniformly to whatever client we're talking to. And I agree with Jason that advice should not change whether you're talking to the county council or the sheriff's office, anything like that. But at the end of the day, I think in giving that advice, we do need to recognize that the ultimate client for the prosecuting attorney's office and all of county government is the people themselves. The people themselves authorize us as the representatives to carry out work. So in giving advice, that always has to remain in mind, that we are dealing and ultimately representing the interests of everyone in Snohomish County.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers, you'll take the lead on this next question about violent firearms incidents. What do you believe are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearm incidents in our county and in our state?
Well, first and foremost, we need to vigorously enforce the laws that are already on the books. I don't see that happening right now. We don't have time for me to go into too many examples, but there I've seen a number of examples just this calendar year of a felon, convicted felon, being caught with a firearm, sometimes a stolen firearm, and they are released from jail without charges, and who knows when they might get charged. Could be a year, could be 2 years down the road. This puts violent felons who have already demonstrated that they have a willingness to carry firearms in violation of the law, puts them back on the street without any sanction, without any lesson to be learned, and then they're free to continue about their livelihood and or go back to carrying another firearm. So we need to vigorously enforce the laws that are on the books. We need to ask for higher bails to keep to ensure that people that are arrested in that situation recognize that we are serious about this, and that maybe they need to stay in custody until they go to trial. And then we need to seek higher sentences upon conviction. The legislature has watered down our criminal laws pretty substantially the last number of years, and criminals are emboldened. I don't think they respect the justice system anymore. So we need to say that we take these sorts of crimes very seriously. And if you get convicted of this, you're going to have the book thrown at you.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, could you please weigh in on the same question?
Absolutely. You're asking for 3 ideas on how we can use firearms. First and foremost is one that we're putting into play right now. The unlawful possession of firearms are cases that are handled by our nonviolent child and nonviolent charging unit. One of the budget requests that we're asking for is a designated DPA is going to focus on those prolific offenders and those cases where we have felons in possession of a firearm when they shouldn't be. We need to make sure that they are prosecuted in an aggressive manner, because anyone who's willing to illegally possess a firearm is a threat and a risk to those folks on our streets. And by putting that focus through our nonviolent charging, by having someone who's going to be specifically the point person that law enforcement can contact when they say, hey, we've got this person who's being brought in, booked into the jail, here's the charges, and here's why we need to have a focus on them, that we can then have that ability to track them, follow them, and make sure the charges go through more quickly. But a second issue we need to be focusing on when it comes to reducing firearm crimes is the ERPOs, the extreme risk protection orders. We need to make sure that we are working collaboratively with law enforcement. Right now, our office works very well with the sheriff's office when they have an ERPO case, which is a request to enforce firearm restrictions on an individual due to concerns in the community and the health. And we need to make sure that all communities have those resources to be able to reach forward. And then third, when it comes to reduction of firearms, just making sure that all firearm offenses are focused on strongly. Right now, we have a great focus on our violent crimes that are committed with firearms, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Cummings, please take the lead on this next question. What are important considerations as your office investigates allegations of law enforcement misconduct?
First and foremost, the prosecuting attorney's office is not an investigatory agency. Investigatory agencies are law enforcement agencies that will refer cases to the prosecutor's office for review and a charging decision. In Snohomish County, in particular, if we're dealing with use of force, if we're dealing with some form of either a wrongful death or an extreme use of force on an arrest situation, Snohomish County has its own independent investigative task force, which is called SMART. When the legislature actually adopted the model for IITs, they looked to what we were doing in Snohomish County. So we have an effective model of a multidisciplinary task force that works to review, independent of that agency, the conduct complained of. They then forward that report on to the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, where we will independently review that work and make an appropriate decision. It's critical for the citizens to have that confidence, but it's something we've been doing for many years. And as you'll know, in Snohomish County, we have been a county that the SMART process has worked. Regrettably, there have been cases that we have actually filed charges against law enforcement for their use of force. Those have been notable cases because they don't happen very often throughout the state, but we take that role very seriously. And it all starts with the SMART investigation, and it starts with an unbiased, neutral review. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I firmly believe that accountability is for everyone. And as I mentioned, I conducted internal investigations for Seattle Police for 4 years. So I've had that opportunity to hold police officers accountable when they violate policy or violate the law. That is something that I will continue to do. But it is also important to recognize that I think far too often in the last number of years, public officials have been too quick to throw law enforcement under the bus, either before all the facts are in, or maybe after the facts are in, remaining silent and not doing a good job of explaining why an officer was or was not charged. I think the public needs to know that. The public needs to understand that if we're looking at charging a police officer, we have the same burden of proof as if we were charging any other suspect. So we would need to prove a case in court with admissible evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes that evidence may or may not be there. Sometimes an incident might be ugly to look at, but the officer acted within the law and within policy. And so I think it is important that the prosecuting attorney, whether or not somebody is being charged, be very forthcoming and transparent with the public, just why or why not that officer was or was not charged. I think that would help. That would go a long way to maybe turning down the temperature and allowing some healing between law enforcement and the community.
Questions that will remain at 90 seconds. And the first one that I have here is regarding setting up a statewide independent prosecutor for use of force, deadly force cases. So the question, Mr. Rogers, we'll start with you. Do you support the concept of a statewide independent prosecutor handling all use of deadly force cases that result in death or substantial bodily harm as a result of law enforcement? And why or why not?
I don't support that. We have the way our government is structured that way for a reason, with the various subdivisions, obviously state and county, and then local governments. I think our government, we're a government of and by and for the people. I think most decisions should be handled locally. We have independently elected prosecuting attorneys. We have independently elected sheriffs. In most places anyway. Here in Snohomish County, we do. And so I think it's important for the people, the voters, to have a say in what is and what is not acceptable, as long as it's, as long as it is within the law, what is and isn't acceptable conduct within their area. And I think that this body of work really needs to stay local. We can have, multi-agency investigation teams to ensure that there's some fairness and impartiality. And if there ever were a conflict or conflict of interest, then certainly we could refer that to a neighboring jurisdiction to take a look at cases. But I don't think centralizing government authority, I don't think that does any of us any good.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings.
That's a really tough question. And the reason why it's so hard is that there are smaller jurisdictions in the state of Washington that will struggle with a larger case. There are some prosecutors' offices in a small county that only have one or two attorneys within that office. And so having a significant wrongful death case involving law enforcement would tax their resources. The flip side of that is having the statewide agency handling it. My concerns is whether or not they would be able to promptly get to these cases and review them in a timely manner. In larger counties like Snohomish County, King, Pierce, other large counties throughout the state, we have the adequate resources with independent investigative task forces that can do the work, put it together in an appropriate time frame, and allow it to be reviewed. Even as we look at the state level right now, when they're setting up the task force for reviewing use of force cases, that agency was supposed to be up and running back in July. And they still don't have the resources and the staffing because they're creating this agency out of whole cloth to carry out the legislative responsibility and the work that was put upon them. So my concern is that if we head down the path towards a statewide entity and apply it across the board, that we're going to lose the credibility of the agency because of the time constraints, and that we're going to lose the ability of the counties that are properly equipped to be able to promptly review and make the appropriate decisions.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Cummings, you'll start with this one, is about alternatives to incarceration for first-time offenders. The question is, are you supportive of alternatives to incarceration for first-time offenders and those who commit minor nonviolent crimes? What would you do to promote such alternatives if you're in favor of them? If you oppose such alternatives, please explain why.
I absolutely support the alternatives to traditional prosecution, particularly with nonviolent offenders and first-time offenders in that area. But again, the caveat has to be there has to be an appropriate screening mechanism. Over the years, as the Chief Civil Deputy, I have fought hard working on our office's overall budget to ensure our TAP and diversion program, which is therapeutic alternatives to prosecution and diversion, where we're able to take those first-time offenders. They are usually dealing with some form of co-occurring disorder, of substance use disorder, and mental health, that we're able to identify, work with them, take them out of the traditional system, work with them in counseling, get them the skills that they need to be back into society in a meaningful way, but more significantly, that they're also making retribution or making payments back in terms of the what they have taken from individuals, that they will also be working on improving themselves and their stock in society. And we've done a lot even in the last year. The current prosecutor, Adam Cornell, has established a lead program here in Snohomish County, which is the law enforcement assisted diversion. Through state and federal grants, there have been close to $3 million that have been brought in, which is empowering law enforcement. It started as a pilot project in Everett and in Linwood. It's expanded to several other cities right now. That gives law enforcement that opportunity to divert someone rather than taking them to the jail, saying, let's take you over here to Evergreen Services to start working with the counselor and getting you on a path towards recovery. So we're meeting them where they're at, giving them the resources. But if it's a violent offender, unfortunately, we're gonna have to head back in other directions.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence on this question. If it is a true first-time offender and it is a non-violent offense, then yes, I would support in some cases an alternative to prosecution. Unfortunately, how some of these programs work in reality is it's not really a true first-time offense. It might be a first-time non-violent felony, but they've committed a couple misdemeanors. And so if we have got a person that has committed a couple misdemeanors and they're now committing a felony, they're trending in the wrong direction, and it's not truly a first-time offense. So I bristle a little bit of that, and I would be more reluctant there. I think far too often these days, there are activists out there that believe that because there's another function of government that's broken, it's somehow unfair to the offender, and so we just shouldn't prosecute them. I have a problem with that. If the mental health system is broken, if our education system isn't functioning properly, we shouldn't penalize crime victims because those other portions of government are failing. So I think we got to be very, very careful. My inclination would be to lean towards prosecution and let those other agencies get up to speed. Let's get them fixed so they can provide those services that they're supposed to be. But I'm out of time there.
All right. Thank you. My last question before I turn it back over to Karen, and we're getting close to the end here of our questions. Has to do with juvenile justice. And Mr. Rogers, we'll start with you. What improvements in the juvenile justice system would you recommend and support, if any?
So here's another area that I feel like we're kind of trending in the wrong direction. There's a movement in King County and other areas for zero youth incarceration. The sad fact is we do have juveniles out there that are committing some quite violent crimes. We need to do something with them. We've spent decades building up the juvenile justice system. We've got the Denny Youth Service Center, and where if a juvenile is held in custody there, they've got access to health care. They're required to go to school. So we can work on rehabilitating them, even though they're incarcerated. We can work on fixing what's broken, healing them, and then hopefully turning them back out so they can be responsible members of society someday as an adult. What's happening now is, I believe there's only a handful of juveniles currently at Denny. We're releasing far too many. and they're being sent out into foster homes that maybe that aren't equipped to handle them, and then they lose those other services that they had at the centralized location. They may not have as ready access to healthcare. They may not be going to school. So I think we need to get back to doing business the way it had been done in years past, and really utilize the services and the programs that are already there, with and not just trying something in a new direction without having any support for it.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. The juvenile justice system has been one that's been under much scrutiny over the last several years. In fact, the Supreme Court put together a task force to look at juvenile justice and to say the system hadn't been working. What can we do to evaluate different changes? And out of that task force, there have been a variety of different approaches that are being looked at. At the end of the day, I think everybody agrees that violent offenders are still needing to be taken off the streets and dealt with appropriately for their violent offenses. But the question becomes, how do we reach out and work on the root causes that are leading to the criminal conduct? There were efforts to put together more of a diversion program in the juvenile court arena. And that's one of the things that are coming from the task force. I think some of the issues we're failing at, though, is the recognition of meeting folks where they're at, in particular, the language barriers that can happen with many folks in our juvenile justice system. The juvenile justice system automatically involves the parents. But when you have parents that don't speak English as their first language, and they're receiving a summons or they're receiving paperwork from a juvenile court probation supervisor that says they're supposed to come into court and do X, Y, and Z, there's a fear and a concern, and they may not know what to do, and they may not come in. And we need to break down those barriers with access to the courts so we can have better conversations, get the families involved, and deal with the root causes that are leading to the criminal conduct. But at the end of the day, violent conduct is violent conduct that needs to be addressed appropriately under the law.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Cummings. And take the lead on this next one about educating the public, please. If you're elected prosecuting attorney, how would you help the public better understand the workings of the prosecuting attorney's office and the justice system as a whole?
Aaron, thank you for that question. One of the projects I'm actually working on right now is the Law and Justice Dashboard Project, which is a countywide effort that began a little over a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, out of the budget process in the wake of the social justice conversations that we as a county have been having. Prosecutor Cornell got together with the courts, with the sheriff, with our other law and justice stakeholders, and said, how can we work together and better communicate the issues that we're facing? Through that process, we've been able to bring in experts from the Institute for State and Local Governance through a grant from the Microsoft Corporation, where we're actually putting together the data that exists in the prosecutors' JustWare database, as well as law enforcement data from the New World. We're going to be one of the first dashboards in the nation that will actually combine both law enforcement and prosecutors' data to give a full picture of the criminal justice process and for how we're having impacts in our community and whether disparate impacts exist. And I think it's critical to be able to put that out in a forward-facing manner, to have communications with our citizens about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how it impacts our community. And it's a very exciting project. We hope to go live here this fall with version 1. Part of that aspect has been a heavy lift of the technology, and we're closing the gaps in these final days to get that technology wrapped up. I joke that I'm an Apple person because I just want to plug and play, but I've learned a lot more about data lakes and dashboards than I ever thought I would.
Mr. Rogers, your thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, that data dashboard is a very critical component. That's something that really needs to be put in place. I'm a little disappointed that it hasn't come to fruition yet. I understand that there are challenges with technology and whatnot, but this has been going on for a little while, and I don't know that the public really has been given the education of exactly what this dashboard will show. So that's a starting point for, I guess, education. I really want to improve the transparency overall with the public regarding the prosecuting attorney's office. Prosecuting attorney's office does not have a Twitter account. It has a Facebook account that I believe was opened up about 10 years ago and hasn't had a single post. Sheriff Fortney does a very good job utilizing Twitter. The Sheriff's Department's Facebook page does a great job of disseminating information. Those are two avenues that that can be spun up and put into effect pretty quickly. It wouldn't take much effort to do that. I want to be much more communicative to the public. I want the public to know when there's a higher profile case. I want the public to know just how we arrived at our decisions and what our thoughts are. Now, of course, we can't give away, privileged information or things of that nature, but we can explain, we can educate the public and say, hey, this is the case we're dealing with. Here's why we arrived at the decision that we did.
Thank you. So far, Paul and I have asked all the questions. Now we'd like to turn the tables and allow each of you to ask one question of your opponent. Mr. Rogers, you'll lead off with your first question, We want to offer you the opportunity to ask a question related to the issues and answers that you've heard during this forum. You will have 30 seconds to pose your question, and the timer will reset the timer to reflect that. And then your opponent will have 60 seconds to respond. Once Mr. Rogers has asked his question and Mr. Cummings has responded, then Mr. Cummings has the opportunity to ask a question and allow Mr. Rogers' response. So the timer has reset the timer to 30 seconds now. Mr. Rogers, what's your question for Mr. Cummings?
During our conversation tonight, we've talked about crime rates and crime increasing and focusing maybe more on violent possession felons possessing firearms. And so I'm just wondering, Mr. Cummings, what are your thoughts of how much impact does the prosecuting attorney's office have on crime rate generally?
The prosecutor's office does not necessarily have the impact on crime rates as much as it has the impact on how we deal with crime and address crime. I think it's critical that we partner with our law enforcement agencies. I've been proud of the support I've received from the law enforcement agencies on this candidacy as they recognize the importance of experience and the ability to work together to deal with those issues. That's one of the reasons why we stood up with the task force to work on the violent crime task force in Snohomish County so that they have a legal representative right there working with the investigators and the law enforcement on the baseline. In addition, it's the reason why we're looking for a training DPA. It's so critical that the changes in the law that have come both from the Supreme Court with its decisional case law, as well as from the legislature, that we're training law enforcement immediately to know how to deal with those issues on the front end, to drive down crime, to make sure we're effectively investigating, putting together cases appropriately, so when they're referred to our office, we can deal with them in an expeditious manner. And I think when it comes to prosecutor services, we have a critical role to play within the crime rates that are out there. But I think we also have to look at the broader issues of saying, why are we having crime rates that are high, and look at the issues on how we can deal with those as well. I think that's an important aspect there. And my time is up.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, might you have a 30-second question for your opponent?
Absolutely. We just recently were talking about communication with the public. And, Brett, I want to better understand when you're wanting to say, oh, we should be using Twitter, we should be using social media to talk about cases. How does that square directly with our rules of professional conduct when they specifically say that prosecutors are limited on pretrial publicity and the things they can talk about, so as not to prejudice a jury, so that we ensure that we actually get effective prosecution that's not reversed later on appeal?
Well, we can do that by not addressing the suspect information directly or dealing with the merits of the case itself. We can let the public know what types of crimes are occurring. For example, these sorts of things, information is already out. The Sheriff's Department quite often makes notes of significant arrests on social media, as does local law enforcement. We can let the public know the types and numbers of crimes we're getting, cases we're getting during a given period of time. So again, so the public has a better understanding of what the workload of the office is, and maybe how many cases we're clearing. They can see the workload we're facing, how hard we're working to clear these cases. And on the back end, make sure that the public knows that they can go to, say, the court's website to find out how cases were resolved and what the sentences were. There are information and resources out there. We just need to point the public to them better.
Thank you very much. Very well handled on both questions and answers, gentlemen. And the final question of the evening, give you an opportunity to back clean up on the night's conversation. Mr. Cummings, lead off if you would, please. What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community? 60 seconds for this response.
The voters are going to have a serious question before them in November. We're just less than 5 weeks away. And I think what's important is to recognize the level of experience that's required to run the county's largest law firm in Snohomish County, and that is the prosecuting attorney's office. We have nearly 100 attorneys and just about as many staff. When somebody looks to hire a lawyer on a personal level, are you going to hire somebody who's actually done the job, or are you going to look to hire somebody who has never actually practiced law? And it's critical for the relationships that are developed. It's critical for the decisions that have to be made. And it's critical under our ethical obligations as lawyers, under the rules of professional conduct, that a managing lawyer understands the work of the office and of the individuals that are doing it in an appropriate manner. And I think that I stand ready to serve this community, to continue my 24 years and beyond, to help lead us into the next chapter of the prosecutor's office.
Mr. Rogers, you have the last word.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm a licensed attorney. I have been since 2008. I have practiced law. I will admit I have never prosecuted a criminal case. What I do bring to this role, though, is my extensive management experience and managing, as I said, law enforcement professionals. The role of police manager and attorney manager, while somewhat different, a lot of things remain the same. A lot of it is setting policy, making sure the troops have the training, the tools they need to get the job done. And it's important for folks to realize that you're electing somebody to make these tough decisions and to manage this office. This is really a managerial role. If you look at the incumbent, Adam Cornell, you can go on the court's website and look at the number of cases he's tried. As a trial attorney, he tried a lot of cases. When he became the elected official, that dropped down to 0. This is not a trial lawyer position. This is a management position.
And that brings our questions and responses to a close. Thank you, gentlemen. The League and Forum Coalition appreciate you two candidates for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and YouTube channel. You can find links at lwvsnoho.org. We encourage you, the voters, to explore additional information about these and all the candidates on the ballot this fall. The Snohomish County Voters Pamphlet will be mailed to residences starting October 8th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. And one last thing, kudos to the behind-the-scenes League of Women Voters team that made this forum flow smoothly. Candidate coordinator was Vicki Roberts-Gassler. Backup moderator was Joan Rave. Timer and backup timer were Nadine Shanti and Shirley Buono. And tech support on the League side was Karen Crowley. Paul, last words?
Thanks, Karen. And it's been a delight to work with you tonight and with our candidates. Ballots will be mailed on October 20th, and election day, of course, is November 8th. Please be a voter. We thank the Snohomish County Forum Coalition members. A special thank you again to David Moon and his team of students at TurkPride.tv at the Sultan School District for their excellent technical support, which we wouldn't have been able to do this without that. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening and watching. This concludes our candidates forum.